Hey, friends, Michael Kingswood here. It's story time and it's Warship Wednesday. I just noticed on the stream that I screwed up the Rumble cast and didn't put in the right stuff. But okay, we're just going on YouTube and Odyssey today. Well, it is what it is. Um, unless I can figure out how to update that while I'm going, but I'm not sure how to. So, yeah, it is what it is. So hey, it's Wednesday, which means it's Wednesday, and we're going to talk about a submarine engagement from World War II that I rather enjoyed. Uh, Not that I participated in it, but I enjoyed reading about it. But first off, give you a little update on what's going on around here. Um, not a lot. Got a lot more books and stories published in the last day. Since that's what I've been doing since I've been able to go out and drive Uber stuff. So it's pretty much the whole thing. But at the end of the day, yesterday, my personal car finally got approved to take up the slack for the Prius, which is in the shop, and I got that registered up, and they actually made some money on the road this morning, so that was good. Um, got the word back on my Uber mobile, and like I told you, the head gasket blew. But fortunately, there was this warranty that I never heard of, didn't know existed for partial zero emission vehicles, and it makes the head gasket repair itself. Uh, the gasket repair at least free, which is nice. But I'm still going to get the head inspected, and I need a brake job and a few other just mileage maintenance things coming up. So it's going to be a few $100 to get everything squared away, but certainly much worse, much better than it could have been. So that's good. Um, so yeah, it's been a good day all around. So what we're going to talk about today is the sinking of the Takashima Maru. This comes from Gene Flucky's memoirs, Thunder Below, of his time on the USS Barb. As I mentioned before, Flucky is one of every U.S. submariner's heroes, or at least he should be, because he's awesome. And he was nice enough to write this book, which, at least when I was going through submarine school, every submarine junior officer was given this when we graduated. And I've read it a few times, and it's pretty great. There's a few anecdotes here. The first one that I talked about last week that I liked was the court martial that wasn't. And we're going to talk about a actual engagement here that occurred on Flucky's first patrol with the Barb, which was Barb's actual eighth war patrol, but his first as CO. He came aboard as XO first, and his captain got removed and, well, promoted up. Although it was part of he doesn't specifically say, but I think it was kind of the uh, time when they were moving less effective guys out and more effective guys in, if that makes any sense. But actually, maybe not, because this is a little later. This is June 1944. So the previous skipper was a good dude, and he got moved to be a squadron commander, I think. But then the Barb and three other boats got sent out to the Sea of Okhotsk, north of Japan, between where the Kamchatka Peninsula comes down, and they were off doing things. It's funny anecdote. Before they sent him out, they asked Flucky, "How many ships are you going to sink?" And he said, "Is five enough?" And at that point, nobody had sunk more than four in the patrol. So they're like, "Yeah, sure, go ahead, dude." And he went out. And this is after he had a couple engagements before this, sunk a couple ships, but this one stuck out to me, and I'm going to read from his words, and then give some modern day commentary as we go. So let's do it. So this is on the 13th of June, and a little preface from him that he put in based on later knowledge. At 02:30 on 13th of June, the destroyer Hatsuharu got underway from their naval base, and following astern was the Takashima Maru, a large army transport that was one of the very few icebreakers that had not yet been sunk. It was built in 42 and was heavily armed and carried 600 troops that were going to the Philippines. They had specific instructions to go. They were going to go across the sea towards the Kamchatka Peninsula and then turn southwest at 14 knots and do zigzags. Um, Basically, they were going to do 90-degree course changes every 4 hours and also do zigzags where their zigs could be as much as 70 degrees off the base course. And the reason for that is, of course, it would make it harder for the submarines to determine their base course and thus get in the firing position. It also lowers your speed of advance, right? The basic trigonometry, if you go over 60 degrees, that's going to lower your speed of advance by about half. So if they're doing 14 knots or doing up as much as 70 degrees, their overall speed of advance is more like 7 or 8 knots. So it's not a lot, not very fast, but with constant zigzagging, it does make planning a torpedo engagement or any engagement a lot more difficult. So that's the purpose for it. Anyway, so they'd been going around, the bar had been going around doing their thing, and it had a few engagements. And at 1713, that's 513 for you people who don't do real time, this sighted two columns of smoke on the horizon. They're on the surface at this point. Um, and they maneuvered around to get ahead of them. So at 2036, after 3 hours, this is Flucky's words, we were 12,000 yards ahead of the target, a position that every submarine would like to achieve before submerging and boring in for the attack. As a modern submarine officer, that's beautiful. If you're 12,000 yards ahead, I'd have shot from right there. Of course, I have homing torpedoes that have much better range than he had back then. Their range was only a few miles, and they had sonar guidance on torpedoes. They just did all kinds of homing techniques that they didn't have back then. Back then, torpedoes were just you point it in the direction and you shoot and hope it hits, which means you have to. These engagements were all very close, and there was a since it's a dumbfire weapon, they had to be pretty precise. Anyway, so Flucky says, yet I felt uncomfortable. Something was wrong. Tuck, who was one of his officers of the deck, had his finger on the klaxon. We were ready to dive, sir? I don't know, Tuck. Take charge. We're going below for a conference. So Bob, I think Bob was his XO, dropped down to the control room with him and studied the plot. And they said, hey, Captain, why don't we war game the possibilities? So they took a few minutes. Since they were 12,000 yards ahead, but the other ships are only making at 14 knots, you get 12,000 yards. 14 knots, you do 28,000 yards in an hour. So at 12,000 yards, you've got about a half hour if they were going in a straight line, but they were not. They were zigzagging. So really, so they had a fair amount of time to figure this out. So they war game out a few different possibilities for what they're doing, and he says, I marked the X 5 times along the line. The targets followed the exact movements they had on the plot at that time. The results, the Barb had 3 successful attacks, and twice was way out in left field, and the targets escaped. So the 5 different scenarios they gamed out, 3 of them worked, 2 of them didn't. And he said, that's not good enough, Captain, Bob said. With night approaching, he may change his course and reduce our chance of success. Concur. We must stay surface and preserve our speed advantage. Keep tracking for a night surface attack, which, again, got to bear in mind World War II submarines, right? They're diesel engine powered with batteries for the engines that are submerged. They made much more speed on the surface. They could do 20 knots or so on the surface submerged. 7, 8, maybe 10 if they pushed it, but then they drain their batteries real quick enough to come back up. So they would always position on the surface and then move back around and then submerge to get ahead so they could shoot from surprise. A night attack they could do to stay up on the surface longer because obviously visibility was less. They also had radar at the time, but it was still pretty new, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Problem was, as twilight faded, darkness brought with it a moonless night, light overcast, and the worst phosphorescence we'd ever experienced. And anyone who's been at sea has seen this phosphorescence thing. There's a bioluminescence will occur when you have the propellers stir up little critters in the wake of a ship, and they will make the wake glow. And if you anytime you're at sea on the right conditions, you'll see this. But if on a dark night, if it's really bad, it's like, man, it's this blue green glow stretching forever. It's very cool. You also see little flashes of light, and it's nice. But if you're trying to be stealthy to attack a collection of ships, in this case, a transport and its escort, it doesn't really help you very much, right? So, So Flucky says, I turned to the quartermaster. Hey, Shankles, give me your pack of cigarettes for a moment. Holding him over the side of the bridge rail, I've read aloud from the fine print on the back of the pack of the loom, from the loom of the phosphorescence, so he could read the cigarettes. The fine print. That's how bright the phosphorescence was. And they weren't shot. They didn't have their lights, their deck lights lit, right? Duh. So that's pretty bright. There's a problem, Captain? Hey, Tuck. Tuck's another one of his officers. We're going to have to change our strategy and tactics. This is too much. I don't want to be sighted. Because I don't like the exert. He didn't like the idea of submerging to do a radar approach because, again, once they're down below, they don't have nearly the speed. So he says, I want to make a shoot for sure sinking at about 1,500 yards. Now, recall naval distances. 2,000 yards is about 1 nautical mile. And we round it off because it's easier that way. If you've ever been to sea, if you're passing a ship at 2,000 yards, it looks like you're right next to it. I mean, this ship is a mile away, but it looks like you're right next to it. So and these are typical engagement ranges that the submariners did back then, was 1,000, 2,000 yards, inside of a mile from these guys. And that's, as a as a modern day submariner, you're getting that close to a ship when you're at Periscope depth, they're on the surface. It's like, holy God, that's really close. These guys are ballsy. Anyway, so they decided that they only have 6 torpedoes left, 4 forward and 2 aft, because back in the day they had stern tubes, right? We don't anymore. When we're positioned ahead, we'll stop, lay to, secure the engines, and answer bells on the battery. So once they get rid of their diesel engines, only using the battery, that significantly reduces their speed, even on the surface. Then they're going to keep an eye on the transport, how fast he goes from beam to beam ahead of the transport ship, and then and they're going to keep an eye on him so they can get away if something goes wrong. So based on that, they can only use their stern tubes. He talks to everybody. Everybody understood? Okay, battle stations torpedo. All right, so now 2 hours later, 22:23. All stop. Secure the engines. Open the altitude doors. Tuck, again, one of the officers, has the ship now on the TBT aft. The TBT was the torpedo bearing transmitter. There's a gadget they had up on the bridge that could interface with the fire control system down in control. They had very rudimentary computers at that time. They were purely analog. They'd keep this thing pointed at the target, and that would transmit the bearing to the torpedo, so the torpedo would know which direction to run once it got shot. And that's how it worked. Ship has a 0 angled about heading right at us. That's great because, he's pointing straight at you, right? The escort's crossing bow from port to starboard, set torpedo depth at 6 feet. Okay. So her phosphorescent bow wave was tremendous as she bore down on them. Remember, it's less than a mile away, and it's pointed straight at them. And he's saying, hey, man, he's saying, come on, Zig, please, because they didn't want to get run over. They also wanted to shoot. All right, then 22:29. Hey, Captain, she's zigging to starboard. Thank God. All right, tuck, steady on her. And then angle to bow port 10, 20, 30. Spread your torpedoes aft to forward, 1,450 yards. Final bearing mark, shoot. And they shot 2 torpedoes at them, 60 degrees spread between them. Wham! Wham! The flash of each explosion lit up the ship for an instant, followed by the green phosphorescent cascade of the descending plumes of water. And then Flucky says, the first hit the stern and blew off part of the fantail. The second hit halfway between her stern and the funnel. Target stopped and was settling aft with her whistle blowing. It was sweet music. Cheers welled up from down below inside the control station. Remember, they're up on the conning tower. Then they got a call from below. Bridge, we have radar jamming. All head full. Here comes the escort. The race commenced with the escort dropping depth charges. Flume, flume. And he orders the radar to keep on the destroyer, because the destroyer's coming right at them. Range is decreasing rapidly, 3,000 yards. But finally, at 2,600 yards, she turned back when she was winning the race. The torpedo was outrunning them and closing on them, dropping depth charges the whole time. Because remember, she doesn't have her diesel engines on. She's just running on the battery. She's not making much speed. That destroyer can do 25, 30 knots. Getting to them fast, but then it just turned away. So they stopped to observe from 2 miles away. The destroyer maneuvered alongside the sinking transport with her searchlight illuminating soldiers with emergency lanterns, lowering the huge boarding ladder from the main deck. Immediately it was crammed with troops pouring into the destroyer. In barely 2 minutes, the destroyer suddenly pulled away as if she were escaping from something. Panic resulted. The pressure of the crush of men coming down the ladder was such that those on the bottom landing were forced overboard. Now it's now time 22:41. In the dim light that had been focused on the ladder, I could see men hanging outside the rail and dropping into the sea. Then I saw the escort heading toward us again. Range decreased as the destroyer, uncovered by the Takashima, made her speed advantage felt. Again, she laid down a depth charge pattern, turned, and went back to the ship again. The scene repeated itself again and again, 5 minutes alongside and 10 minutes chasing the barb. It was extremely nerve-wracking for everybody. Every time I moved the barb in for a possible attack on the escort, the destroyer came after us. It was difficult to comprehend my target's motives. We had continuous radar jamming. His radar must have picked us up inside of 3,500 yards, but why was he breaking off his chase and dropping a depth charge salvo? He must have thought that we'd submerged. It was very eerie. Again, bear in mind, at this time, radar was new, right? Recall at Pearl Harbor, they had set up the first radar array they've used and had specialists operating it, and they didn't really know what the hell they were doing. And they saw all these blips coming in, weren't sure what it was. They called it back to headquarters and said, "Oh, it's just the B-17s coming in, and don't worry about it." And they ended up being the Japanese bombers, right? But because it was still a new thing, and especially on board ship, these radar transmitters were not put on, especially submarines. I think it was 43 when they got put on, so they're still getting used to how they worked. And they're certainly not the long range things we have now, and also not nearly as pinpoint accuracy in terms of bearing range for all these things. So no doubt the Japanese with their radar was equally new to them, and they were still equally figuring it out as they went. He goes on, in the black yet clear night, the weird flat chases froth the green phosphorescence, and the depth charge explosions rumbled the hull. And he decided to drop down to control to radar to see how the sinking was going, because then he couldn't get a good view of the sinking ship. But he figured if the radar, you can see it on radars, the blip would go and then go away. But as I talked with Bob, something caught my eye. Glancing down the hatch into the control room, I was shocked to see Reb Holt, a fictitious name, frozen with fear, gripping the sides of the ladder, his face stark white. Then Flucky says, "Hey, Bob, take charge of the evasion. I have to go below." Skipping down the ladder, I put my arm around Reb's shoulder. "Hey, Reb, let's go up to the wardroom and talk." So he's taking his sailor to the wardroom to have a talk with him. In the middle of an engagement where they've been dip charged, he's trying to sink a ship, all this stuff's going on. Reb was silent until he passed through the watertight door of the forward battery room. He said, "Hey, Captain, don't dope me up. Please don't dope me. Hey, Reb, nobody's going to dope you. We're going to sit down calmly, have a cup of coffee, and relax and talk. Nothing else." Jackson, who was the wardroom steward, bring us 2 cups of coffee. And the Reb said, "Captain, I'm scared. I never had a night like this. It's horrible. The depth charge is pounding against the hull as if I was in a coffin. It's like thunder below. We'll be lost." "Hey, Reb, wake up. They're going to be lost, not us. This is why I brought you here. The enemy is sharp, but we're sharper. Until you come to your senses, I'm not going to have you infect the crew with fear. I need every man on board to be at his best in combat. Fear breeds errors, and there's no room for that tonight. Our target is sinking. You stay here until it does." "I'm sorry, Captain. This submarining isn't for me." "Jackson, this is an order. Reb is to stay here until we secure from battle stations. Reb, drink your coffee. This isn't the end of the world." It's now midnight 3. And Bob, next so, "Hey, Captain, we got less than 2 hours of darkness remaining. Recommend we circle around to the side and finish her off with the torpedo." So they agree to do a coup de grace. So they put on 2/3 speed to circle around because the target is stationary as she's sinking. The escort's patrolling ahead, so they're going to circle around, go from the side. And we were halfway around when the lookout said the escort's pulling clear again, and then we trained in that direction. The bow of the damaged ship was rising majestically into the air. It seemed as if an unseen hand grasped the tortured hull and dragged it into its frigid bosom. The death of a beautiful ship, the hideous side of war. The destroyer headed down our track, depth charging desperately. I called the control room, fill one of those empty 5-gallon milk tins with oil, punch a couple of holes in the top, and send it up to the bridge. Sam Turnage appeared with the can. What do you want me to do? Climb down on deck, toss it overboard, and give them an oil slick to depth charge at daylight. And then he says to his officer of the deck, they don't have enough charging the battery. Let's get out of here. Secure the outer door. Crank up the engines at flank speed, and let's get out of here. He goes back down. They put on full speed, get out of there. Goes back down, and they see the ship sink. Cheers everyone. They're listening to the depth charges. And he goes to the wardroom. No one was in the wardroom except for Reb. Smiling, I looked at him, and he says, Captain, I'm okay now. You're right. Depends on the way you look at it. It is a pleasant sound. I won't let you down again, thanks. Forget it. Go join the others. So one of the crew members had an illegal diary. He wrote this down. Sighted smoke on the horizon. To port was a lone ship, a cinch. To starboard, a larger ship with an escort. I guess you know the Bard picked the one with the escort. Both torpedoes hit the large ship in the belly. It started to sink. The escort came around and chased us. Kept closing the range, dropping depth charges all the way, while everybody was practically dropping it in their pants. Instead of diving, the captain outsmarted him, thank God, and kept on running on the surface. The escort got to the spot we should have been. We weren't, and he dropped well over 20 charges. We hung around to make sure the ship went all the way down. The escort kept pinging and searching for us, dropping charges here and there, but to no avail. The ship finally sank. It's a good thing the night was real dark, or we might also have been tagged. Standing by for anything. Postscript that Flucky learned later. The Japanese reported the passenger cargo icebreaker Takashima Maru sunk. The destroyer Hatsuhara reported that we had fired 4 single torpedoes at her while she was alongside removing troops. We did not. I like that engagement encounter for a couple of reasons. First, it shows the tactical difference, what I grew up with as a modern day submarine officer, and also the issues people were having with radar. But I really like that leadership point with Reb. Right, there's a lot of ways you could handle that, and I've seen, and talk. I've not been in a shooting engagement on a submarine when people are depth charging you or anything close to that. But you talk to people about what they would do when, and you have other leadership scenarios you get in, and the temptation could be to come down hard on the guy or to do whatever. But what did Flucky do? Took him aside, gave him some coffee, say, hey man, keep your chin up, it's good, and give him some encouraging words, and helped him to regain his courage. And he did. And he went on through to be a great crew member. He already was a great crew member, became a better crew member because of it. Good leadership of helping your men through a hard situation instead of browbeating them. So that's what I like about that. It's one of Clucky's early engagements in his first war patrol, but I think there's a lot of good stuff there. Yeah. So that's that. We'll have more of Flucky's discussions, and I have some anecdotes from the good ship Constitution and her sister ships to go through as well. We'll do that as the weeks progress. But for now, I think I'm going to be going for almost a half hour here. So unless anybody has some comments, I'm going to say thanks for joining in, and I'll catch you tomorrow for the normal daily stream update, and on Saturday, where we will do Story Saturday, where we're going to read my story, Sacred Vows, about a monk and a nun who fall in love, but can't really be in love because they're monks and nuns, and how does that go? It's kind of fun. Anyway, cool. Well, hey, thanks for coming around. I will talk to you guys later. Until then, don't do anything I wouldn't do.